You know, I've spent my career taking on some of the cultural baddies, you know, some of the most prominent intellectuals in the world, some of them in public debates, some of them behind the scenes. And I've come to realize that ideas define everything that we do. With an academic degree, you're trained to be a researcher and writer to the point that it's annoying. But I'm grateful for it. I'm not talking about books I've not read. I'm not talking about papers I've not read. Whether I agree with them or not actually isn't the point. There are quite a few books that I would read that I would say are actually evil books. Donald Trump, when he was in a divorce with his first wife, she said he has a copy of Mein Kampf next to his bed. I wish more people did. If the German people had bothered to read that book rather than just have it on their shelf, we might have avoided the Holocaust. If more people read the Quran, they'd be wiser to what Islam actually is, what they actually believe. If people bothered to read, as I have, the writings of Klaus Schwab and the various contributors to the World Economic Forum and the ideas that are driving the globalists, I read them because I want to understand their mentality. I cut out the middleman. I go straight to the ideology. Everything in your life is being defined by either your ideas or the ideas of the people around you. And each episode, we're going to be digging into a different idea that appears in the culture. This is Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. Welcome to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton. So how did we get here? How did we get to a place where America's children have become murderous sleeper cells and possessed of an evil ideology? The answer, sadly, is quite easy. And I'll show you how. Just take a look at this. Just listen with me as we watch this montage, which someone has brilliantly put together.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick them.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
That's it right there. Pull it up. I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
It's pretty incredible stuff. And honestly, this is the more mild rhetoric. It's much worse. You can find it all over social media. The President of the United States calling for violence, the Vice President calling for violence. That is from the Biden administration. rhetoric calling for the assassination of the President of the United States, for harassment and violence against those who support him. And those, of course, are chiefly conservatives, many of them, perhaps most of them, Christians. And it's no surprise that this would result in the murder of Charlie Kirk. But I want you to see how this plays out in reality. Now, this show is called Ideas Have Consequences, and that's both good ideas and bad ideas. In this case, evil ideas. So you've had this steady drip of this kind of rhetoric. Now let's watch the president of Oxford Union. Oxford Union, if you're not aware, Oxford University, the Oxford Union is a very prestigious debating society. It's been around for a very, very long time. It's has been the host for presidents, for prime ministers. It has had many prestigious members. But this is where they are now. Listen to this. Now, this is the president of the Oxford Union. Listen to what he has to say here.
To effectively create change in the world we desire. And Side Prop will argue that at times there is simply nothing else that can be required other than violent retaliation. And this is a view I wholeheartedly agree with. The view that some institutions are too broken, too regressive, too oppressive to be reformed. Like cancers of our society, they must and they should be taken down by any means necessary.
Violence, he says, he supports wholeheartedly. And those that he disagrees with politically should be stopped, and I quote, by any means necessary. So you see that at a governmental level and entertainment level, since you saw Johnny Depp there, saying, when was the last time an actor assassinated President of the United States? And then you had Madonna saying she was thinking about blowing up the White House, and you had Robert De Niro saying he wanted to punch the President of the United States in the face. And that has an effect. That has a consequence. Those ideas, that rhetoric has a consequence, a real world consequence in the lives of our youth. So that you have, presumably an intelligent young man, he's at Oxford University, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and the president of the Oxford Union, the most prestigious debating society in the world, calling for violence and to stop those with whom he disagrees politically, which of course are on the right, by any means necessary. So it shouldn't surprise us that a young man took up a rifle, climbed up on a rooftop, and shot Charlie Kirk in the throat. While, interestingly enough, Charlie Kirk was responding to a question about transgender violence. He was just being asked, do you know how many mass shootings, transgender mass shootings there have been? And he said, too many. And in that moment, he was shot. He was shot in the chest, but it ricocheted and hit his carotid artery. And of course, he bled to death. He was assassinated right there on the spot. And that gave us this. That gave us this right here.
The best part of this whole goddamn thing is that he is not martyr material, so his death will mean nothing. It will activate no one. It will impact few. It's just great.
So there you have a young woman who is celebrating gleefully the murder of Charlie Kirk. A fine young man, father, 2 young children, a husband, and a man who was simply sharing his faith and was killed for doing it. In uncertain times, wise investors look for stability. Markets are overinflated, inflation remains a concern, and global tensions continue to rise. That's why many are turning to the safety of physical gold and silver. AlphaOmega Gold is a Christian-owned precious metals company known for honesty, transparency, and biblical stewardship principles. Their team help clients protect their investment with integrity and clear guidance, never pressure. Right now, AlphaOmega Gold is offering a free precious metals navigation guide to explain why owning gold and silver can be a smart, strategic hedge for retirement accounts and long-term security. Don't wait until economic shifts impact your future. So today, go and visit www.ao.gold/IHC or call 855-4AO-GOLD. That's 855-426-4653. Call today to learn how simple it can be to secure what matters most. Charlie Kirk, incidentally, is a martyr for the Christian faith. Not for a political cause. He is a martyr for the Christian faith, and we'll come back to that. But you see, here we're watching the progression. We have people at the highest levels of our government calling for violence, and the result is that those ideas are absorbed by young people who become as radicalized. The member of Oxford Union here who's speaking, and this young woman, they are as radicalized as any member of Al-Qaeda, as any member of the Taliban. That's how radicalized they've become because they have been affected. They've been told essentially to do these kinds of things by members of our government, by members of our media, by members of our entertainment industry. And you can see why they would do it. Because they think to themselves that they have an opportunity to be a hero, to go out and be the hero for their cause, to save America from tyranny, from fascism. It's interesting to me that the assassin, Tyler Robinson, he grew up, so far as we know, he appears to have grown up in an average American home, mostly conservatives. Now, he wasn't. He was a radicalized leftist, but he grew up in a religious home. He grew up in a home that was a conservative, a typical American home, a typical American family. But then he was radicalized. Having heard Trump and Trump voters called fascists repeatedly by the former president of the United States, by the former vice president of the United States, by Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, what did he do? He joined Antifa, the anti-fascist movement, which is, by the way, fascist. If you've been paying attention to previous episodes, recent episodes of Ideas Have Consequences, this has been a topic I've been addressing for this very reason, because the term fascism, and for that matter, Nazis and communism and socialism, are all being terribly misused, chiefly by the left, to muddle the discussion about these things. They themselves are the fascists. They are the fascists. The irony is, I'm sure that if you'd have had a conversation with Tyler Robinson and asked him, what is fascism? Please define it for me. He would not have been able to answer that question for you. And by the way, if President Trump were in fact the dictator that they claim that he is, if he were truly the fascist that they claim that he is, the Nazi that they claimed that he is, I assure you of this, that every member of the Democrat Party would have already been rounded up and put against a wall, because that's the way fascist dictators roll. That's the way communist dictators roll. That's just the way dictators in general roll. But instead, we see a president who is operating according to the rules of law, the rule of law in our Constitution, in ferreting out those who are guilty of this crime and who are radicalizing our children. But it is an enormous task. But interestingly enough, Tyler Robinson, having been the recipient of this type of propaganda, he clearly came to believe that Charlie Kirk, the president of the United States, the MAGA movement, that these were modern-day fascists. They were modern-day Nazis, and that he would be the hero. He would be a kind of Dietrich Bonhoeffer who would go out there and do the hard thing to save lives, to save America, to save freedom, to defeat tyranny. We know this because the shell casings that he was using or planning to use. He only fired one round, so they found other shells there on the site, other rounds that he hadn't yet used, upon which he had inscribed anti-fascist slogans, things like "Catch this, fascist," and things of that nature. And we also know that this is a young man who was a homosexual living with another young man who was transgender, which is to say that he was a young man too. Brian Krasenstein, I don't have any idea who he is, but apparently he has some sort of following. But you can show how warped. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, is Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32. I won't read them here, but let me briefly characterize them as this way. Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32 that say that man has rejected God and he suppresses the truth. And the progression of that is that having suppressed the truth, he then perverts the truth, and then he perverts life itself. That's the way Bible commentator Kent Hughes puts it, which I think summarizes it very, very nicely. Again, suppress the truth, pervert the truth, and then pervert life itself, so that you arrive at these kind of places where you're asking questions like, what is a man and what is a woman, as though they are philosophical rather than biological questions. Listen to this tweet by Brian Krasenstein. Now, I don't know who he is, other than he is an operator, a leftist operator on social media, apparently a young man. He's paid probably to lie and to try to direct the narrative in a particular way, a warped way. And he does it right in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination with this tweet. If you're a man who has a relationship with a trans woman, you are in a heterosexual relationship because she is a woman and you are a man. Now, this is an effort to try to paint Tyler Robinson, the assassin, as just a normal guy, not as a homosexual. And he is a homosexual. I want to put this as delicately but clearly as I can. If you have a sausage and you are in relationship with someone else who has a sausage, you are homosexual. It's just very simple. It's biological. If you have a sausage and you're in a sexual, I should specify, relationship with someone else who has a sausage or had one, perhaps they've had it removed, then you're a homosexual. And Tyler Robinson, it seems that he wanted to believe, to paint himself, as some of these people do, as a heterosexual because the guy that he was in a relationship was masquerading as a woman and was apparently in the process of transitioning to become a woman. That is to say, not really to become a woman, but you understand, to have the surgery to get rid of the equipment that made him a man and to acquire fake equipment that would make him seem to be a woman. This is what we're talking about here. And we also know that the two of them were into furries. I had to look this up. I'd never heard of this before. And then I go, I remember this during the Biden administration. Furries, the fetish of sexual attraction to anthropomorphic animal characters where they wear animal masks. Now, you've seen this. This, too, was modeled by members of our government during the Biden administration. You'll recall images like this. Sam Brinton, the guy who was eventually fired, he's wearing dresses, with Rachel Levine, the guy who was the Surgeon General, but who also masqueraded as a woman. And here he is, pictured in these bizarre outfits. And then you have a member of our government, member of our military. This image was being circulated. This was all stuff and remains stuff that was being promoted by members of our government, members of our society. And we would be foolish to think that these things don't affect the thinking of our children. We're discussing the consequences of evil ideas today. and how it is that you end up with a young man who grew up in a seemingly typical American household who can be so radicalized that he thinks that it's just and good to go and shoot Charlie Kirk. It's important that we understand this, ladies and gentlemen, because it's important that we protect our children. It's not just about protecting them physically. It's about fortifying their hearts and minds against this kind of evil that is going on. I was reminded of this, and I've used this on Ideas Have Consequences before, and undoubtedly I'll use it again because it is so germane to this discussion. Rise and Fall of the Third Reich author William Shirer, who was a reporter in Germany during Hitler's rise to power in the 1930s, he's an American. He wrote about the effectiveness of propaganda. And this is what he had to say. Now, bear in mind, William Shirer was an American. William Shirer was a patriotic American. He wasn't a Nazi. He had no sympathies with Nazi Germany. But he's talking about the effects of Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine, even on him. And this is quite insightful. I myself was to experience how easily one is taken in by a lying and censored press and radio in a totalitarian state. Though unlike most Germans, I had daily access to foreign newspapers, especially those of London, Paris, and Zurich, which arrived the day after publication. And though I listened regularly to the BBC and other foreign broadcasts, it was surprising and sometimes consternating to find that notwithstanding the opportunities I had to learn the facts, and despite one's inherent distrust of what one learned from Nazi sources, a steady diet over the years of falsifications and distortions made a certain impression on one's mind and often misled it. No one who has not lived for years in a totalitarian land can possibly conceive how difficult it is to escape the dread consequences of a regime's calculated and incessant propaganda. Repeat that last line. No one who has not lived for years in a totalitarian land can possibly conceive how difficult it is to escape the dread consequences of a regime's calculated and incessant propaganda. Ladies and gentlemen, as adults, we are all affected by the steady drip of propaganda. You can't escape it. Not totally. It will affect the way you think on a number of things. And this is how Shirer points out the German people were slowly conditioned to thinking first that Jewish people were not human, and then thinking that it was okay to kill millions of them. It's how a German people were slowly conditioned to believe that they were victims and that to overrun the whole of Europe was their birthright. And it's how, ladies and gentlemen, Tyler Robinson's happen. The steady drip of falsification, the steady drip of propaganda, you cannot wholly escape its dread consequences, says William Shirer. And he would know, having lived for years in Nazi Germany. And it remains true here. So again, you have members of our government repeatedly, and it gets, there are many, many more than the ones we've just shown you here, but repeatedly for years on end, the steady drip of saying their political opponents must be stopped at any cost, that they are Nazis, that they are fascists, that they are, what did Nancy Pelosi say? Enemies of the state, enemies within. Sooner or later, someone thinks to themselves, I will have the courage to do what no one else here has the courage to do. I will go and stop Trump. And that was the attempt at Butler, Pennsylvania. And I am I'm sorry to say this. I think there will be more attempts on Trump's life, on J.D. Vance's life, on other members of our government's life, on other the lives of other people. People who watch this show regularly know there have been attempts on my life in this year. There have been attempts on other my other colleagues, not just Charlie Kirk, but many of them have been harassed, have been legally harassed. Their members of their family have been harassed, and that there have been attempts on their life. Charlie Kirk, sadly, the outcome for him was just different than it was for me, than it was for many others. But the point is, they're winding up these kids and sending them out to do these kinds of things. And see it, the strategy here is that it gives them some measure of deniability. Did they have, and by the time this is aired, maybe it will come out, that there was actual, interaction between higher ups in the Democrat Party and this young man? At this point, we don't know that. At the point of recording of this show, we don't know that. But to me, it's immaterial, because we do know that there was contact in terms of the ideas. He was listening and he heard. Who knows what he heard in his school or in university that he attended, I think, for just a year. Who knows what he heard? The fact of the matter is, they are seeking to create these kinds of sleeper cells, and they're doing exactly what they want them to do. But it gives them the deniability to say, hey, we didn't know him. We didn't have anything to do with him. We didn't arm him. We didn't tell him to go do that. We're horrified. No, you're not. You're high-fiving. You're excited. You're orgasmic over this kind of stuff because it's what you want. And by the way, as of this moment, 1:35 p.m., day 6 after Charlie Kirk's assassination, there have been 0 cities burned, 0 stores looted, 0 people murdered. We are not the same. Conservatives, Christians, we're not the same as these people. It's not how we roll. It's not what we do. It's what I was pointing out, about the claim that Trump, if he were a dictator, if Trump were a dictator, they wouldn't be saying this. They wouldn't be attempting this, because they would know they would all be hanging from meat hooks. That's what Hitler did. That's what Hitler did to everyone. Operation Valkyrie, the attempt to murder Adolf Hitler, his Gestapo rounded them all up, even just people who are peripherally associated, and murdered, tortured. That's what dictators do. So all the violence, the rioting, the looting, the rhetoric, violent rhetoric is coming from the left. And by the way, I don't want to make too much about someone saying we're involved in a war, or we're involved in a battle, or we're fighting. We all use that kind of language. It's been used politically for a very long time without having literal meaning. The problem here is that they do mean it literally. They do mean it literally. You've seen perhaps the interview with Jasmine Crockett, where she says that we're in a war, and the interviewer says that everyone needs to take up a weapon. That's not typical rhetoric, unless you're on the modern left. And for them, it is. And yet it's astonishing to me that I go around the world and you still hear people saying Trump is a fascist. And that's because propaganda is effective. I know people will say mainstream media, they're dead, they're ineffective, they're not doing anything anymore. Wrong. The reason they still exist is because there's a segment of the population, A, that watches them, B, that advertises with them, and C, believes all that. They believe it. What Shire says here was my point in an episode or two ago, where I was talking about my recent trip to Germany and the taxi driver, Rolf, who I told you was such a reasonable, nice guy. And that his historic analysis, as he's driving me around the city and talking about, he was born during World War II. He was born under Nazi rule. He was there when the wall went up in Berlin. He lived through the Cold War at the epicenter of the Cold War. How he discussed communism and the way the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, which of course was communist, the way they operated was dead on. And then all of a sudden he says to me that Trump is a fascist. Said it 3 times. And then I began pushing back on him. You'll remember the story. And here was a guy that was educated, that was thoughtful, who had traveled, and who's historic. I wouldn't call him a guy who was on the left. But then he comes up with this line that Trump is a fascist. Now, why would he say that? It's because he has been the victim of the steady drip of propaganda that says exactly that. So that when I began pushing back on him and saying, okay, you've said that 3 times now, I've had enough, justify that. How is he a fascist? Name one way that he is a fascist. And apparently I didn't finish the story. So many of you went onto YouTube and said, hey, what did he eventually say? He said nothing. Rolf said nothing. I think he was embarrassed he had said it. I think he said it trying to garner goodwill from me, because I think he had judged wrongly that as an American, I just must be a Trump hater. Probably was used to having in his taxi people from New York or Chicago or LA or something. He judged wrongly. And when I pushed back on him regarding that, he had nothing to say. And that's because it was a contentless statement. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't justify it because there's no truth in it. All of the fascist tactics are coming from the left. And that's because fascism is, as we've explained in other episodes of Ideas Have Consequences, it is a leftist ideology. So he had really no idea what he was saying. And as I argue here, I have spent so much of my career with engaging young people, like Charlie Kirk, somewhat different, speaking on college campuses for sure, but speaking at a lot of conferences, and we've hosted our own for many years with youth. And of all the things that I have done in my career, there are perhaps none that I love more than training young minds, training them to think, not indoctrinating them with propaganda, but training them to think, and to think biblically, to see the world biblically, to think in a way where they can discern right and wrong, and not just the obvious stuff, but the subtle stuff. It's what we do here on this show. It's what we're trying to do here for you on this show. And I have really, really enjoyed doing that over the years. And I cannot tell you the number of kids like this Tyler Robinson that I have known, that I have engaged. And you can just feel it in them. They're just seething with rage. Seething with rage, often to do with bitterness about sin in their own lives, often because of fatherlessness. Not the case here. His father was a law enforcement officer, I think, for 27 years. His father was in the home. We don't know what that relationship looked like, but I don't think we should always assume that a bad child means bad parenting. God, who is a perfect father, has the most wayward children. So I've never liked the idea that we should always jump to the conclusion that a bad child means they had bad parents. Sometimes it means that. Often it means that, but not always. So I'm not prepared to blame the parents based on what we know at this point. And I will say that some of the early images that we see of this young man give us a picture of him. Excuse me, I have a this is the reality of dealing with things post-accident. What I see of this young man early on, some video that we have of him, he just seems like a nice, typical kid. And then suddenly a switch has been flipped in him, and he's been radicalized. He has been radicalized. Crosby, Stills, and Nash said this: teach your children well. Teach your children well. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. Parents, grandparents, if there are any great-grandparents who listen to this show, use the opportunity to teach your children well, to teach your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, the young people in your lives. Seek to encourage them, point them to the cross, point them to Jesus Christ. Impart wisdom to them, biblical wisdom to them. Teach them of a God who loves them and created them just as they are. Transgenderism is the idea that these kids have been taught that they have been put in the wrong body. It's why Scripture views this type of thing as a special category of sin, because you see, it's an assault upon the image of God. It's saying that he made you wrong, that you're not, he put a female in a male's body and a male in a female's body. God doesn't do that. No such thing. That's completely invented. That's leftist ideology. And these kids grow up self-hating, and they grow up hating the world. There's a reason why this is not the first murder of this type. There's a reason why for that. Luke 17:2 says this, it would be better for them, that is, wicked people, molesters of children, it would be better for them to be thrown into the sea with a millstone tied around their neck than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. I quote that particular verse here because the people who have radicalized young men and women like Tyler Robinson, there will be hell to pay for you. There will be hell to pay for you. You think you get off scot-free for this, but while there's physical molestation of children, there is intellectual and spiritual molestation of children, and that's what these people are guilty of. You did this to them. And because of that, God's wrath burns towards you. It would be better that a millstone be put around your neck and thrown into the sea than you having been guilty of this. And it's what you've done. I said that one of the things that I've enjoyed the most has been working with young people and mentoring and helping them to think. And it's because, I mean, first of all, it's been a major part of my career. I was a youth minister, and when I was in college and in graduate school, and then of course I taught in a preparatory school. I taught in university, for a time as a GTA, and then as a writer, speaker, I've been engaging with this demographic for a very long time. And they are, as I have said, a very sincere demographic. It is very rare, as Gilbert Hyatt points out, to encounter youth who are hypocrites. And as he points out, those who are almost always spiritually broken. They are painfully naive and sincere, and they are looking for meaning. They're looking for meaning. You see, we're teleological beings, that is to say, purposeful beings, and we're looking for meaning. And sometimes what I would always notice with this demographic, between the ages, I'd say of between about 13, 14, and about 17, kids drop anchor in some kind of ism. If they're not given the gospel, if they're not pointed towards Christ, they end up dropping anchor in an ism. Now, that might be environmentalism, that might be feminism, that might be fascism, that might be communism or socialism, or you name it. But they will eventually drop anchor in something like that because they want to be part of something bigger than themselves that gives them purpose. And you see, ladies and gentlemen, young men, the reason why so many young men turn towards violence is because young men have a penchant towards violence that's natural and even good. Some of you will be shocked, to hear me say that. Little boys, don't prevent your little boys from wanting to jump off of the deck and go, smash together some of their toys and to rough and tumble. I mean, within limits. So you don't want them killing themselves or other people, but boys like those kinds of things. God's designed them that way. There's a reason why little boys like playing things like football and wrestling and, roughhousing, out this kind of thing. And this sort of thing, boys have been taught these days that it's toxic, that there's something wrong with them, that if they have these kind of desires to go and test themselves physically, and boys do, and it's because young men, and you can see it in them. I mean, it has a physical manifestation as boys are starting to go through puberty. They can feel the strength of youth coming upon them. They can feel the strength of youth coming upon them. Their voices are cracking, their voices are changing. They're becoming more muscular, they're becoming taller, they're becoming faster. And they become aware of it. And they want to test themselves physically, entering a race or maybe joining one of the teams at school, one of the sports teams at school. Eventually, maybe joining the military. Used to, loads of boys would join the military precisely because they wanted the adventure and they wanted to test their physical limits. Can I do it? Could I become a Navy SEAL, or could I become an airborne ranger, or could I become a member of Delta Force, or could I become a paratrooper? Could I do it? Could I get through boot camp? And those boys who do, I've seen so many young men, snot-nosed and disrespectful. I don't know if this would be true today, given where the military has gone, but who joined the military, and after boot camp, I would see them, and they were changed in a positive way, had a bounce in their step. They had respect for themselves. They had respect for others. And it's because they had been given meaning and purpose. We're teleological beings. But you see, boys who are told again and again how toxic they are, they end up having a genuinely toxic outlet for those natural aspects, those natural inclinations that they have, sexual and otherwise. And it culminated in a boy on a rooftop shooting Charlie Kirk while he was sharing the gospel. I've mentioned this movie on here before, but it bears repeating, and I would suggest you go watch it. It's Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, starring Jimmy Stewart. It's the movie equivalent of Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky's great novel. But Jimmy Stewart, as I recall, he plays a professor of criminology. And he began speculating to his students whether or not the perfect murder could be committed. And his students decide that they will impress him by committing the perfect murder. He's horrified to discover that they've done it, and he's the guy who solves the crime and so forth. But where I think that movie is misunderstood, or where I think it's wrong, is that the real villain of the story is Jimmy Stewart. He's the one who radicalized them, who weaponized them, and who sent them out, albeit unwittingly. He's portrayed as the protagonist in the story, But he's the one who did it, and it's because he was irresponsible in his teaching. You must understand that young people are all too ready to put legs to your crackpot ideas. They are. And the left does understand this. And that's why they do the sort of thing that you have in T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral. Do you remember that? Did you ever have to read that in school? It's not very long. But it's about the murder of Thomas à Becket by the knights of King Henry II. And Henry II, after a drunken orgy of a dinner, he says aloud, famously or infamously, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" A couple of knights look at each other. I'll be the hero. They get on horses, they ride that moment to Canterbury Cathedral, and they cut down Thomas à Becket. But you see, Henry later had the deniability. That's not what I meant. I didn't tell them to do that. I was just kind of speaking rhetorically. The left is not speaking rhetorically, ladies and gentlemen. They mean it. They claim they're speaking rhetorically, but they mean it. And they're a terrorist organization. Now, the channel where this show is housed, not DirecTV, and it is on DirecTV as well, channel 378 NRB. You can find it there. Wednesday nights, we have a primetime slot there. But the social media channel where this is placed, it has had a boot on our throat. You know, an episode starts out, so well, and then just dies. And everybody keeps telling me you got to learn how to get around that. Well, the way you get around that is by not saying certain things, not teaching on certain things. And it's just not in my DNA to do that. I want to tell you the truth, and I don't want to be censored. I want to tell you the truth. And unfortunately, the hard truth about Charlie Kirk's murder involves all the things that I'm talking about here, which social media puts the screws down on you when you begin talking about them. Unless you're talking about them positively, affirming them. Let me give you examples. I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating. I have this little bobblehead right here today. My students, years ago, in my classroom, I would keep things that were of historical significance in my classroom, and then just some things that are fun, just, to maintain their interest, and so that I have, means of interacting with them in a way that's not just about the academic element. So I started keeping bobbleheads. I thought they were amusing, and I had, some interesting historical characters that were bobbleheads. Well, my students, seeing that I like bobbleheads, they started bringing me all kinds of bobbleheads. They wanted to please me. I had a good relationship with my students. My students knew that I loved, that I cared about them. It was more than just the teaching. I wanted to have an impact on their lives for good. And students started bringing me bobbleheads. Unfortunately, Lori couldn't find any others. This is the only one we could put our finger on, but I've got a box of them somewhere. A Martin Luther, a John Calvin, King Richard the Lionhearted, and Michael Jordan, and all kinds of figures, bobbleheads. They just started expanding on my shelves and all the way around my classroom. They saw that I liked them, and they started collecting them for me. Perfectly harmless. But it's an indicator that you have a certain measure of power with them. I've also told you before, but not everybody watches. Some of you are probably first-time viewers. My students saw that I collected rocks from historic sites around the world. So what did they do? They started bringing them to me. Here's one from Olympia. A cobblestone pulled straight out of Red Square. Straight out of Red Square in 2003. A rock from Omaha Beach. A piece of Hadrian's Wall. It's in 2001. A stone from Mycenae, King Agamemnon's city, if you know anything about the Trojan War. And then here, one of my more prized possessions, This is a piece of the Parthenon in Athens, Greece. They chipped it right off, meaning that I had unwittingly created vandals, out of my students. They're going around and chipping off pieces of historic sites all over the world and bringing them back to me because they knew that I collected rocks of this kind. Please, if you send me any rocks from historic sites, please don't vandalize a site in order to get it for me. Just that little disclaimer. Don't do that. But again, the point that I'm making here is that young people are ready. They often want to please their teachers or their professors, particularly if they admire you, if they look up to you. And they're ready to put hands and feet to your crackpot ideas. And if you are not pointing them towards the truth with a capital T, John 14:6, there's no telling what they might do. And that's because they're sincere and painfully naive. Teaching is an enormous responsibility. And I talk about that in another podcast that we might drop this week, recorded before Charlie Kirk's murder. Dostoevsky says this in this book right here. If there's any book that I could get you to read other than the Bible, it would be this book, Dostoevsky's Demons. Sometimes this book is translated as The Possessed. But the idea behind it is Dostoevsky, who himself was Dostoevsky is an interesting figure. He's probably my favorite author. I greatly admire Dostoevsky. I taught Russian literature for a number of years, and hence my interest. And Dostoevsky was born, if you're not familiar with him, he was born in 1821 and he died in 1881. His great books are The Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment are his two most famous works. And then you have works like this, Demons, or again, sometimes translate, as The Possessed. Dostoevsky was a product of minor nobility. He wasn't a peasant, so he came from the higher echelons. Unlike Tolstoy, Tolstoy was of the much higher nobility and had actual rights at court, meaning Tolstoy and his family, he could actually call on the Tsar if he wanted to. Dostoevsky was much further down the ladder, socially speaking, but still with the nobility, not just of the of the gentry, the bourgeoisie, or the peasantry. And often those kinds of kids, we see it today, they have the luxury of free time, and if that free time isn't properly directed, it will often result in destructive activities. Assassination attempts, looting, rioting, plundering, or just gaming. I don't have anything against games, video games, but if that's your life, if you're in your 20s living in your mother's basement, your 30s, you don't have a productive job, that's a problem. That's a problem. And you see, past generations of Americans often didn't have that luxury. They had to work. My father has told me of how when he was a kid during the Great Depression, all the children worked. And we're talking about children 9, 10, 11 years old who are mowing lawns or working in the cotton mills or delivering papers, and that they didn't get to keep the money. The money went to the family to put food on the table. Everybody had a responsibility, and they didn't really even have the luxury, again, that you see today, where they could kind of spend decades deciding what they wanted to do with their lives. It wasn't about self-fulfillment. It was about the needs of the family. You had to work if you were going to feed yourself, clothe yourself, or feed your family. But you see, in a very affluent society, kids frequently have the option
perhaps because their parents let them, but also because the money is there, they have the option of doing nothing or almost nothing, or pursuing, hobbies as though they're actual careers, even though they don't actually make any money. And this often has a destructive end. I was talking to a woman, this is related, stick with me, who was operating a German Shepherd rescue. If you're not familiar with these are nonprofits, and some of them are specific to a breed. So it's like, a collie, what did I just call it? Rescue, or border collie rescue, German Shepherd rescue. These are nonprofits that specialize in taking in dogs that have been abandoned and providing homes for them. And anyways, I was talking to this woman about German Shepherds, a breed that I love. I was thinking, I don't understand it. Why would there even be a need for a German Shepherd rescue? I mean, these are expensive dogs. All these dogs you have here, these aren't mutts. These aren't strays. These are dogs with a lineage. They're possibly AKC registered. Some of them, you've said, are, even tagged with a chip. You can actually find out who their owners were. People paid big money for them, and yet they abandoned them. Why? And I like what she said. Her answer was so good. She said, German Shepherds are a dog that a lot of people have a romantic interest in. They've watched a movie, or maybe they've seen a police dog, or something. Maybe they grew up with images of Rin Tin Tin. And because German Shepherds are regal dogs, are beautiful, they're regal, and they love the idea of having one that will be their friend and will protect them. And then they get it and they put it in the backyard. And guess what? It starts digging holes. It starts destroying the lattice, digging under the fences, destroying the shrubs. And then they think, holy smokes, I don't want this dog. And so they took it out into the countryside and put it out. Her point was that German Shepherds are social creatures. They want to be with their master. Ranger, who is around the studio, he will lay at my feet. He wants to be right where I am, wherever I'm going. And if he's separated from me for too long, he dislikes it intensely. But you see, he's a big dog, and he's an intelligent dog, and he's got lots of energy, and he's powerful. And if he's not properly directed, if he's not socialized, he turns all that energy into destructive things. If I just put him out into the yard, there's no telling what he would do. This is America's youth. This is the world's youth. You got to give them things to do, significant things to do, direct their energies. Otherwise, I love the way she put it was this way. She says, when someone tells me that their dog is destroying all these things, I say to them, what would happen if you put your teenage son in the backyard and didn't interact with him? Do you think maybe he would turn his energies to, burning things, destroying things? Yes. And you see, that's what's happening with a lot of these kids. That is what's happening. And the left is radicalizing them. They're turning them into sleeper cells who will do their bidding. And this is Dostoevsky's point. In this particular book, Dostoevsky says is saying that there are certain ideologies that possess their host like demons. Hence the differentiation in the two translations. One says the possessed, and the other one says demons. But the translator of this one says, I call it demons because I think other translators have gotten it wrong. It's not about the host. It's about the demon, the ideology that is demonic that fills its host, radicalizing them, turning them into murderers, criminals. And you've seen this again and again and again. Some ideologies are like this. Evil ideas have consequences. And it's the sort of thing that we saw in Utah and in Butler, Pennsylvania. These were young men. Young men. I was reminded of this as I've been thinking about this, like many of you. I've been As I say, I didn't know Charlie well. I had dinner with him on one occasion and liked him very much. But there's something very deeply upsetting about this, as though I did know Charlie very well. Something traumatizing, I think, to a lot of people who didn't know him at all and who have felt some measure of sleeplessness over all of this. And, the image that came to my mind was this. I don't know that this image made it here in the United States. Maybe it did. That is to say, I'm sure it did on the internet, but I'm not sure that it was ever circulated in media or put on the front page of a newspaper, but it was circulated widely in Britain. And it is this image. It's the Independent, July 2015. And this is when, ISIS was spreading like wildfire all over the Middle East. And we're engaging in all these beheading videos. Well, one of the videos showed a little boy sitting atop a clearly drugged and bound Syrian soldier and beheading him. And the Independent carried this image of this boy. Now, you don't see here, the soldier, but he's sitting atop this soldier, holding him by the hair and with a knife at his throat. And it's a child. And I want you to look a little closer here. Look at his eyes. Look at his eyes. Do you think this boy's been radicalized? Do you think he's been taught to hate? Because I assure you he has. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban radicalized kids like this. And they're teaching them to not just murder and behead, but to rape and pillage. And do the kind of things that happened to the poor woman on the Charlotte train. By that, I'm not suggesting the guy was a Muslim. I'm just saying those types of activities. And it's how you go from this image. I want you to look at this image from The Sun. This image of Tyler Robinson. He looks like a typical American kid, smiling, happy, his whole life before him. Again, just a typical American kid, but it's how you go from an image like that to this sinister image of the same boy. Just in a matter of years. How did we get there? Look at his eyes. Look at the difference in his eyes. He's got the eyes of the little ISIS boy. And Dostoevsky would say to us, I'll tell you what happened. They've been possessed by demonic ideologies. One of them is religious, the other is secular, but both are murderous. Both are full of hate. That's what is happening. That's what's taking place. Our children are being radicalized by a secular ideology in this country, just as some have been radicalized by secular ideologies or religious ones in other parts of the world. And it's important to think about the incrementalism of the sordid sexual agenda of the left. Let's think about it. Circa 1990, they claimed we just want to be tolerated. We deserve to be tolerated. And the approach of most Americans was to say, look, we're not interested in peeking in your windows. What you guys do inside there is entirely up to you. About 2008, they said, we want to be recognized in marriage. We want marriage, an institution since the beginning of human history, millennia old, to be redefined to include homosexuals. They got that. Circa 2016, they said, we want access to your children. Drag queen story hour and parades, and we want to be teachers teaching your children these things. circa 2020, we militantly demand that you not just tolerate our lifestyle, but that you accept it, that you endorse it. We demand it. That's when you started seeing all these political and entertainment figures, sports figures, all begin endorsing this. People that kind of surprised you. And you thought, this guy isn't on board with this, but he's being coerced to do it. You'll lose your job unless you do this. And many of them bent the knee, or maybe I should say bent over. And then 2025, we have the right to murder you. We have the right to murder you. This isn't anomalous. Tyler Robinson is, again, he is possessed of an evil ideology, but it's not just any ideology. This is a sexual ideology. It's a sexual ideology. As I end, I want to read something to you, a little article that I put out on Twitter that's gotten some visibility. And I'm addressing the question as to why has Charlie Kirk's murder affected us so deeply? It relates to our conversation here. Why? People didn't respond this strongly to the attempted assassination of Trump. There's been many other innocents who have been murdered. Is it because of Charlie Kirk's celebrity? No. A lot of friends of mine had never heard of Charlie Kirk. A lot of people in this country had never heard of Charlie Kirk. So what is it? I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, discussing it over coffee with my wife, Lori. And this is what I come up with. What makes Charlie Kirk's assassination so shocking is that it happened here, in the U.S., in Utah, not New York City or Chicago or Portland, on a college campus that wasn't UC Berkeley or Harvard. Had Charlie been murdered in, say, Nigeria, he would be no less a martyr for the Christian faith, but you would know that he went there knowing that martyrdom was a possibility. You would also know that Erica Kirk knew it too. But Utah? A red state? I've seen critics possessing the omniscience of hindsight suggesting Charlie should have known better, or Charlie should have had better security, or Charlie should have. It's ridiculous. You don't site survey these events with a security detail like a presidential appearance. This was a first of its kind assassination. Conventional wisdom said, in spite of the death threats, that threats would come in the form of things thrown from the crowd or a member of the audience rushing the stage, not a Butler, Pennsylvania style sniper. That combined with the fact that Charlie was no Louis Farrakhan or Reverend Wright spewing hate, but was instead a likable, reasonable guy there to win souls for Christ, makes it all the more shocking. And we need to be clear on this. Charlie Kirk was martyred for his faith, not his politics. And that's because his faith defined his politics, not his politics, his faith. It is, in other words, Charlie Kirk's obvious innocence that appalls us. He was struck down like Stephen in Acts chapter 7. He wielded no weapon save the two-edged sword of God's word. The purely evil, premeditated, JFK-like nature of his murder has sent shockwaves through the whole world, eliciting fiery emotional reactions even from people who had never heard of Charlie Kirk before last Wednesday. It is our sense of justice that is outraged at not only his murder, but at those who celebrated it with hateful glee. For some, this was a moment of jarring realization that their schools and universities, their local businesses, aspects of their government, local and federal, and their communities harbored truly evil people. The evil wasn't in some faraway place, but very near indeed. So near, in fact, that an average American boy who seemingly grew up in an average American household was radicalized, weaponized, and sent out as an assassin to do exactly what those celebrating Charlie's murder, all Democrats, wanted him to do. And make no mistake about it, they want more of the same. I can't claim to have known Charlie well. I met him at Mar-a-Lago a few years ago and enjoyed dinner with him. One of the disappointing things in this line of work is the discovery that some celebrity types aren't what they seem to be. Charlie, who was the age of one of my own sons, was exactly who he seemed to be. Sincere, confident, driven by a mission he knew to be his calling, a patriot, friendly and easygoing. Charlie wasn't about clicks, as so many people are, or money. He simply wanted to see people find purpose and salvation in Jesus Christ. That he was murdered doing exactly that is laid bare the demonic ideology that has possessed so many in our midst. That has galvanized millions who are suddenly aware that from that moment on, it cannot be business as usual. Evil must be confronted and it must be defeated. Let us pray for Erica Kirk, her children, their family, and our nation. Charlie Kirk died a martyr. Ladies and gentlemen, we're actually winning. We're winning. I know it's very hard to see that in a dark moment like this. The murder of an innocent man. But we're winning. And that's why they're resorting to this kind of violence, to this kind of rhetoric. And it's because the left, the global left, not just Democrats, the left are panicked. They're absolutely panicked because they know that they have lost control of this country. And this moment may be yet another key turning point in this spiritual battle. I want to encourage you with these closing words. They've been on my mind a lot lately as I think about courage, moral and physical courage. And they come from Joshua chapter 1, verses 7 and 8. It's the Lord speaking to Joshua, who is now taking up the mantle after the death of Moses. It's like Harry Truman following Roosevelt. Oh my gosh. Harry Truman told Eleanor Roosevelt, "I'm so sorry," when he learned that FDR died, and she put her hand on him and said, "No, it's I who am sorry for you. Because you are the president of the United States now." This was Joshua's situation. And here's what the Lord said to him. "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep the book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." My closing words for you, ladies and gentlemen, are this. After such a heavy episode, be strong and courageous. This has been another episode of Ideas Have Consequences with me, Larry Alex Taunton.